Right, welcome to a bonus episode of Virtual Apres hosted by PSIA Northwest. Today, I want to welcome you to our special guest, Eric Rolls. He is originally from the Eastern Division. He's currently living in Park City, where he is the training manager. And if you can believe it, he has been on the national team since 2008. He brings a ton of expertise, and he is now the current snowboard head coach. Awesome. Thanks, Eric. Thanks for being here.
Of course.
Fabulous. So we're here really to talk about, like, where did people skills come from? And what is that origination? What are the stories that give it substance, that bring it to us, like, right now? Like, I can only imagine this must be such a journey that this idea and concept has been on. Take us right back to, like, where were the sparks? Tell us about the origination of the people skills and those early days.
Yeah, thanks for queuing that up. I think it is an interesting story, and I'm glad to tell it. Of course, it'll be from my point of view, but I'm hoping to add some color to what that might have been like in the room when we discussed the original learning connection model, which included people skills. And it really started in the team that was the 2012, 2016 team. And we were all trying to answer the question, what makes up a great instructor? What makes up a great instructor? What skills make up a great instructor? And there was a lot of passion around the topic. We all have opinions, and especially the group of teammates. And it was interesting because that was our charge for one of our team trainings. And so we went back to our respective discipline condos and started having this conversation. And led by Lane Clegg for the snowboard team, he really posed this question on the the snowboard team. He said, why are some instructors more successful than others? And certification isn't always the deciding factor. Why is someone with a lower certification highly requested over someone with a Cert 3? Like, what makes them so good? And we all agreed, and then we kind of swayed over and talked about, like, well, we sure know a lot of level 3s that are jerks. And so what is that? Like, they're in the system, they're dubbed as, like, great instructors, and they are, and yet, just didn't quite paint the full picture of what these other folks that weren't as highly certified. And so through conversation, we started talking about, interpersonal skills, soft skills, and what these people do differently and how they connect with the guest. And, and we started talking about, well, is that even trainable? Is this even, are these trainable skills? So, after some round and round discussion, we landed on, at the time it was this idea, a phrase that Chris Hargrave brought to the table was, soft skills. We started talking about soft skills. Eventually we branded it as people skills, because it was just a more familiar term, and so it was interesting. As we met back up with a bigger team, we all got in a room. I remember it very clearly. It was in Copper, and we all got in this conference room, and about 30 people in the room, and we all, each discipline, kind of started making their pitch on what makes up a great instructor. And again, lots of passion. There was a lot of exchanges. The Alpine team in particular was really talking about, technical skills and the ability to showcase technical skills. And
I can imagine that.
Yeah, and the snowboarders were saying, like, we feel that you need people skills is the most important, because without the ability to connect, and create a great learning environment, you can't even get to the technical skills. So we made our pitch. And what started out as this, like, friendly back and forth soon got elevated to, us all defending what we feel is most important. And I felt like Telly and cross country, we were sitting there. It was kind of like a tennis match, and they're watching alpine and snowboard go back and forth. And they're like, don't forget about teaching skills. And we're like, yeah, we all agree with that. Okay, moving back on to technical and people skills. And I remember it, just watching this and just thinking about like, wow, the alpiners are really focused on technical skills. The snowboarders are really focusing on people skills. And I think I would say that each discipline, like that's already our strength. So we're like, you know, really leaning on towards our strength. And I remember standing up and getting everyone's attention and saying, hey, I just want to point out that, you know, alpine really wants technical skills. And I feel like that's where, you know, that is strongest already. And maybe the snowboarders need to tighten up their technical skills, you know, and I think we'd all agree that that is true. And here as snowboarders, we're emphasizing people skills. And I think the alpiners, I think you would all agree that that's a place where we shine and like create a connection within our culture of snowboarding. And there was some head nods. And I said, so I think it's interesting that we're all veering towards our strength, which we do when we teach. Absolutely. And, you know, everyone nodded and like, yeah, that is interesting. And then it went right back into the passionate
totally. I almost like hear one of our people skills like happening in that original come together as one team of like self-awareness. And I'm hearing all this as like, and is this, I would love for your clarification here is like, is this rooted in that global question of, you know, what makes a great instructor? Because it sounds like that timeline when Interski put that out and was looking for like, well, what makes a great instructor? And I heard you talk a lot about like the magic, the thing that, you know, Lane Clegg kind of put out to the question. Talk to us a little bit more about that connection there.
Yeah, and just to kind of throw in there, I think that Interski for that year was focused around retention, was focusing on getting people into the sport, was focusing on retaining people. And so that led us to really think about, and I forgot the exact title of it, but it really led us to think about like the attributes of an instructor. And so, you know, within that conversation, within, you know, that Lane Clegg, you know, posed to us, you know, was really just trying to drill deep into, you know, what made people more successful than others, you know, and then through Dave Schuling's leadership, he was really, as the education director, he was really starting to pull all this info together and really starting to like make some, you know, decisions around how to categorize these. And of course we came together thinking about like, oh, these are all important and they should all have equal weights. And you see it now in the learning connection model where it's, you know, it's equal parts, you know, that one isn't more important than the other. So we had to kind of get away from, you know, what we felt was most important or what we felt like should be chronological, but just how we like categorically put all this great information that we've had scattered throughout our manuals and tuck them into these categories so we can really focus on the development of the instructor and really be able to identify like what are your strengths and what are your opportunities, and then really focus on that towards that individual's development. If somebody is really good in technical, you know, and maybe not as good in teaching, so now you focus your training on the teaching skills, you know, and if your ability to connect with people was strong, what does that look like? And like, how do we train to that? And what we ended up doing as a snowboard group, we really started we created another model, of course. Just most of us are visual and we like that. We love Venn diagrams. And so we created a model that was a bit more prescriptive. And what I mean by that is just, you know, something that you could just do, like do this and this will help create a connection with your student. Simple example.
A couple examples.
Yeah, would be like put up your goggles, you know, shake their hand, welcome them, especially the beginners, welcome them and, you know, help them out, like how to get them to look the part so they fit into this culture that may be just so odd to them at first. And so we had really prescriptive kind of steps that we laid out. And then we sprinkled in some things that you would need to, as an instructor, sort of adapt to. That came later in that cycle where like, you know, you wanted to revisit and assess how they were feeling, how they were doing, so you could, you know, change your plan up within the lesson to adapt to what their needs were. as an individual or kind of as a group as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
So
was that
that's
part
what,
of the original model, or did that come later on?
that's a great question. It really started to come to life with the adaptive approach when Anne Shorling, really laid out that spectrum of saying like, yeah, there's some things we want people to do through these prescriptive suggestions, but what we really want them to do is get to this adaptive approach and really meld into the environment as you're like combining both the student profile and the teacher profile. And so that was a light bulb for me. That was really like changed, how I looked at this and how we ended up really sorting out what's the difference between a level 1 and a level 3. And we had those sprinkled in there a little bit, but we didn't really call them out like she did. She really put some definition around adaptive versus, prescriptive. She really identified those terms, which was just a great jumping off point to really kind of look at this at a bigger scale. Like we are focusing on a really specific part of the lesson, which was the beginning, and then how we connect with them as we build rapport. And now she gave it like a larger scope to it, and we were able to create, sort of more scalable across all the levels, and then really look at like how we build those skills at those levels. So
That's awesome.
yeah, it was well received at Interski, and we had no pushback, including this last last time at Interski when we continued to promote kind of where we were in people skills. There was no objection by any other country that people skills weren't like essential.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. It's like taking the one team concept here, in the US and like making it global. That's amazing.
Yeah, it was really fascinating. And speaking to the one team, I think it's pertinent to just kind of share a little bit about like back to the conflict that we had when we worked through this information. There was so much passion around it that we had conflict that ranged from individual to individual and what we believed needed to be included, as well as like discipline to discipline. And so we did operate in a little bit of a silo at first. Snowboarders working on people skills, alpine working on technical skills. The Nords kind of shifted over towards technical skills because they had some opportunities there to sort of continue to create fundamentals. And then, as we got together, we started talking about the importance of, really cross-pollinating between strengths of individuals as well as across the disciplines. And that's where we ended up getting together to create the teaching skills concepts, at least the start of that, as well as at Interski, we presented people skills, technical skills, and then we asked the international community, what makes good teaching? And so we actually collected that information. So we had this really cool, international component of feedback to say, like, what is good teaching? Brought that back. And then there was more conflict created around the difference between people skills and teaching skills. Because, and now we have like, well, that should be in teaching skills. Well, that should be, in people skills. And even in technical, it was like, is MA, should that be in teaching or should that be in technical? Like we kind of like, it was this like, full on debate with like, high fives and a beer afterwards. And it was all good, but we were all like kind of sticking to what we really felt, how these should be categorized. And in the end, we knew that they needed to fit somewhere so we can like categorically collect this stuff and like get it to the member in a way that they could easily kind of like sift through it and develop toward it. So.
Oh, that's awesome. I wonder if you could just take us into the room in one of those conflicts, because some of the things that I'm hearing when they come up is like some of our own conflict, right? Of like, whether it's my own debate of like, well, do I really need this? I thought I already had it. I thought I was hired because I was fabulous, and as you've worked through some of these stories, I'm almost hearing a real-time example of the different disciplines within the national team, learning how to become one team, and a little bit of a parallel to my own internal conflict or the conflicts that I hear maybe within my school and other places. Could you take us into a story or something that might help shine some more detail on what that process looks like?
Yeah, sure. I'll just pick up kind of around the teaching skills part where,
Yeah.
you know, we had some success when we integrated different minds, you know, the classic, like the collective is, you know, going to create better outcomes than individuals, you know, and we had some examples where that worked really well. And those kind of happened a little more accidentally where you would have disciplined individuals agree with each other. And all of a sudden you had this like, and then it was like, wait, I thought you were on our team, you know? And it's like, wait, what's going on here? And then it's like, oh, wait, what's our first team? What's our first team? Like, oh, we are a team. Like, yeah, we're disciplines. And it's like, it was like, yes, we have a lot in common, and yet there's some differences as individuals, and it shouldn't be, you know, separated by what we're sliding on. And, you know, we made a pretty, you know, and then, you know, what really was that transition was when we were creating those teaching skills. And there was a specific task, there was a specific task force that was like assigned that. And then they would come back to the bigger team and present back. And then when there were questions and something was challenged, you would see some defensiveness from people, and you know, they put a ton of time into it. And we just realized it was hard to involve everyone. You know, you put like 25, 30 people in the room by the time you put in other leaders of the organization. And so we really need to focus on, you know, creating a task force that was multidisciplined and had a variety of strengths to it. So that, you know, through some, you know, specific examples around, you know, how that happened organically, we decided, you know, within that success that we saw, let's do this purposefully and connect a lot of different individuals to have a voice. And then those individuals would report back to, you know, the discipline work groups, and then provide into that task force that was working on the teaching skills. So, and that was, we really showed the strength. I think that 2012, 2016 was such a turning point for the one team. And we went into that inner ski just so united on this information, you know, that then that like propelled us with purpose to make sure we were cross-pollinating like that from then on. So, and every once in a while we'll get these hiccups where we'll realize that, oh, we weren't inclusive to this other group. We really need to give them a voice and what this looked like. So then we had to really call ourselves out and make sure we put in the effort to include everyone, which is super important. And then include outside perspectives too, like not just within the team. And now let's get divisional leaders. And now you see kind of what's become of that through Nick Herron's leadership, is like really got to include all the stakeholders to get to the decision, get everyone a seat at the table to really contribute, and to not only get buy-in, but to actually like create the best material possible.
It sounds like you're really established. It sounds like the organization and like this move towards a single team. And then it sounds like Nick kind of popped in and talked about membership is like, I really see an underlying theme of value here. And I'm thinking as like, you know, like, how does this roll into like my value as an instructor, and how, you know, kind of moving to that space of like, you know, the underlying purpose of the skill building.
Yeah. And I think, you know, what Nick Herron really brought, you know, not only from a perspective of a team member, you know, becoming CEO, but he was really focused on, you know, how do we support the divisions? How do we support the members? How do we support the end user of the student? You know, and if we're And how do we support the schools specifically? You know, and if we can't do that as an organization, then we're not showing the value of what we have to offer. And so, you know, to your point, like it really was, you know, about value and creating more value for the organization. So I think that, you know, trying to keep all those stakeholders in mind as we're working through this stuff, it really came down to relevance. Like how can we stay relevant in this industry and support all those stakeholders and what we do? And we often identified issues where people felt like the exam process was separate from the job. Like, oh, I got to go jump all these hoops, do these, I got to ski or ride a specific way to check the boxes to get my pin so I can get a raise. And then I go back to do my thing and teaching, and I'll probably have some other cool little progressions and tips that I'm going to learn along the way. And yet we really wanted to create the relevancy, you know, of what we're doing in exams to the job and really prove the worth of the organization. And I think we've been so lucky that there's been pay connected to levels of certification. And now we can really prove, you know, how that's connected and say like a level 2 instructor, this is their competence level in these categories. This is what they've been assessed on specifically. And this is what you can expect from them. And adding that people skills component as more and more ski areas and resorts are really focusing on the guest experience, the guest service part of things is great. And little side note, for my OG snowboarders out there, the snowboard teaching system in the old instructor guide.
Oh yeah.
Was what actually had these elements in it, which I think is great. And it was like the sort of beginning snapshot of riding concepts, teaching concepts, and guest service concepts, which was the way that the manual was organized. And granted, the service concepts, that chapter was a little thin, but I think we were onto something. You know, we knew like it was about the guest more than ourselves. So I
totally like kudos to even mentioning it.
Yeah.
Like that's incredible. I know historically we hear these rumors of like, oh, you hire for personality and you teach the technical skills. And something I'm almost hearing this full circle as you're talking of where, you know, this global concern, you know, at Interski, you know, 5+ years ago, where it was saying, hey, look, we have a serious issue of a decline in lessons. And being able to come back and say, okay, well, what brings people coming back to the resorts? Like, how can we increase our guest services, specifically when it comes to on-snow instruction? So, and the thing that, you know, brings a guest back or turns a guest away is the instructor. So identifying that, like, basically the most valuable variable, whether we're talking about a plus or a minus. And then I hear you talking about how, like, okay, well, if the instructor is saying, let's invest in the instructor, let's identify that there are skills that can be taught. And I hear like some rehashing, moving through, you know, some like offhanded prescriptive models, and then maybe some like back of the book guides that acknowledge that serving the guest's whole experience and their well-being contributes to the bottom line within the industry and the livelihood and longevity of our industry and our jobs ultimately. And then bringing us almost to where we are now, where we have simplified fundamentals that seem transferable, like something that our clinicians moving forward can actually go out and teach. Does that sound like full circle? Yeah, cool. And then talk us through the fundamentals that we have now. Like how on earth did we get from, you know, back of the snowboard teaching guide to 4 fundamentals that have that fit into our learning connections model?
Yeah, no, great segue. You know, and this was comprised of, you know, a work group that represented each discipline in this group. And, you know, we really went through kind of all of these, if you can imagine those big like Post-it notes all over the room. and just, plastering all over in this one particular event in Keystone, just like taking over, multiple conference rooms with just sticky notes everywhere. And then, this task force representing all disciplines needed to, kind of distill that down and figure out kind of like what are the most important things? How do we have coverage of all this, yet, keep it specific, and so that was part of the challenge. So you can imagine the first versions of these fundamentals were just thick, just like that should be 3 sentences, but we're making it 1, and it's like, oh, that's implied to that. And I think Jonathan Ballou, he really added, some good linguistic, skills to what we were trying to do. Is like, well, that's implied to that if we just put that. And, specifically, we did keep the one where we're talking about, two-way communication. Well, communication needs to be two-way for it to occur, but we really wanted to emphasize the importance of making sure the student was in the conversation. It wasn't just like the instructor one way, just like, pop, pop, pop. We're like, let's keep that one.
Totally.
And so we were able to, with several phone calls, after training, to really distill down, some really simple versions of the fundamentals. And then we knew they were going to be shortened. How the alpine skiing fundamentals, they like, all you have to say is like magnitude, and everyone knows which one that is. Or you say, you can just be like ski to ski, or, there's all these shorthands that the members are going to create, so I got it. I know.
Wait, do snowboarders not do this? Hold on.
No, we do. And the alpine skiing fundamentals have been around a lot longer.
Okay.
So we've just seen the evolution of the shorthand versions of those. And then you have the purists would be like, there's other more important parts of that. You really have to say the whole thing. Anyways, going back.
I can hear that echoed loudly.
Yeah. And we're like, it's in relationship to the center of mass. And that's an important point, but we knew that it was going to, get shorthanded. And Anne came up with that me, you, us, it's about awesome. Me, it's about you, and it's how we are together. And, and how all those fit together in that. So we kind of like, through her suggestions, we front loaded it to really simplify, kind of what do they really mean? And it's like, oh, it's interactions between me, and then the combination of us together, so so that's kind of, without getting into, individually specifically, which is probably a whole other conversation or,
totally
event.
I love that. Oh, well, and I think something I love about the people skills fundamentals specifically, and that has come up over our summer series in season 1 for Virtual Operate, is that it's really tangible. Dave Lyon originally kind of talked about, he was the first, at least on the show, to talk about how, you're working your way up the fundamentals to get to the objective, which is trust. So me, you, us, trust. And giving people a foundation within the fundamentals to get to the objective of being capable of establishing and maintaining a trust-based relationship. And I think that is incredible, because when I think about the tidbits that I understand about humaning, which is really pretty difficult, is that learning is not happening if there's no trust. I'm so up for being told I'm wrong. However, that's what I'm moving forward on. And I think so often we talk about people skills or kind of that thing as just like they've got it or they don't. But what I notice that gets practiced so often or historically is that someone says, well, I tried to do the thing you did, but it didn't work for me. And what I've heard you talk about kind of over and on is like developing a skill, being able to transfer it. Talk to me just a little bit more about like the ability to acquire this skill and how it's different than just having it. And talk to me a little bit about that piece of the value ultimately here.
Yeah. And they, yeah, and there is a debate out there whether, it's trainable skills,
Mm,
whether, these interpersonal skills are trainable. And
mhm,
the majority say yes, but there are some people that debate that and say, you're born with these traits that make you better at it than other, although that may have some truth to it, they are trainable. And we really wanted to create like actionable behaviors that you could see. And so when we really focused on actionable behaviors you could see,
mhm.
then you make them a little more tangible. And now we can find out, how do we train to that through
Oh.
actions. And so that can be as simple as doing things prescriptively,
Mhm,
which can check the box. Yep, they put their goggles up. Yep, they shook their hand, they smiled,
mhm,
they gave this genuine interaction, to that adapting to the environment. And
mhm,
that was one of the harder ones because it's like an if then statement. So in an exam or in a training
mhm,
scenario, like how do you know they're adapting to it?
mhm,
And so what we had to focus on was like, it's similar to MA in teaching and an
mhm.
exam or training, is like it's real cognitive. So how do you get what's in their head into your head so you can know what they did? It may not be obvious from the observer. So through
Mhm.
certain questionings, you can ask them, I noticed you took it this direction. What led you to that decision? It's like, well, I noticed that so and so, showed this body language, or they responded this way, and it allowed me to think about like, okay, I needed to back up a step before moving forward. Or it's like stuff we do in real teaching, what great teachers do. And it's like, how do you train to that? And it's like,
Mhm.
oh, okay, it starts by just like dissecting things as actionable behaviors, and then move outward from there. And when we a little bit about the trust one, and this
Mhm.
ties in to your comment, we were writing up a learning outcome for trust,
Mhm.
right? And the way that it was structured, we don't have to write a learning outcome for each fundamental to assess to, but in this case, people skills, it aligned really well to do so. So when we started in on trust, we started putting some actionable things, and then it was like, well, that all falls into these other three categories. And then it was like, I think Anne was the one who said this. She was like, I think trust is the result of all these, because every time we keep trying to put an actionable item, they fall in these other categories
Mhm.
also. And so we trimmed it down to three learning outcomes. And I think one of Dave Lyons, one of his strengths, he's so great at like taking complex things and making them simple. And he can like do things, I mean, he'll like use one sentence for
Mhm.
every five I use. It's great. And so um he really helped us refocus a lot on that, where it was like, he really reiterated like trust is a result, and these are the
Mhm.
actionable items to get there, and let's
Mhm.
let's focus on that. And we worried that it wouldn't be as clean, a little bit, but
Mhm.
it all was true at every turn that we were talking about. We created, if we're assessing this and looking for this particular skill,
Mhm.
how do we train to it? Can we do that? And can we see it when it happens? And does it help build trust? It was kind of like these, ways to kind of keep us in check. And we went through, a few different versions to get the wording right, but we use some of that to help guide us a little bit. Like,
Yeah.
it can't be this nebulous thing that's out there that gives people the sense that we're evaluating their personality, because it's not. It's not personality. These are
Mhm.
skills. So I think that probably took us the longest to try to like keep readjusting to that. And now
Yeah.
that we've landed on what we have for the updated standards, we're going to still be testing to that. We still need
Yeah.
examiners and educators to really, make sure we're doing that, as intended.
Yeah. Like
So,
I've heard some really interesting points pop up as like you kind of shining a little bit of a light on what it might look like within the context of an exam, which I know is from my personal experience, like the number one question that comes up when this feels new is either A, how do I test to this? Or B, how am I going to be tested on this? And understanding that like it's taking these three supportive pieces that you talked about, that you committed about and said, wait a second, the definition of trust or building it as a skill is these three other pieces. And it almost sounds like, I felt like the example you gave, you were almost giving this example of someone having enough self-awareness to be able to speak about the ability for them to see someone else and where they were and to know how to adapt to it, which happened really, like in the way you were speaking about it, was very fluid and something that feels really familiar to me and something I witnessed. And I'm going to guess is actually also very familiar to many of our members, is like being able to look and say, oh, we're at the top of a run that's not the right run for my student. I'm going to make a change because I can see the body language in my student. All of a sudden they went from being, from laughing, moving their body fluidly to being stiff and silent, and being able to translate that into an action that maintains the trust. Like that, like totally clicks for me when I hear you talk about it. That, and then I also have this like image of like really being able to have a framework to be able to pause and say, wait, command teaching is not always effective, and being able to pause and then again, like almost like cycle back through, that my self-awareness, my ability to see someone else and ability to communicate to way back up to that trust bump. I love that. That is so cool. And I just keep going through the whole history of this and bringing it back to the value of like increasing the value of our jobs. And thinking about so much about how creating these like incredible, memorable on-snow experiences, I always take it to heart that that's my job. And ideally, and learning a new skill or skill acquisition specific to the discipline I'm teaching, I feel like that's secondary, especially if I want return business. Wow, this is really awesome. I wonder if you can like bring some of this all together for us and give us a little bit more about like, what's next? Like how could maybe if we're talking to somebody who's having a hard time adapting, like moving into implementation this year, maybe some tools that you've come up with for yourself, something along those lines that you'd love to share with us.
Yeah. So I think the first step, I keep going back to of like this prescriptive versus adaptive, depending on where you are at in your development and awareness of these skills, these people skills concepts. But you can always start out with doing some things that are, just very purposeful. And even though they may seem a little cliche, or they may seem like, okay, I'm going to insert this verbiage in here, it becomes easier and it becomes more natural the more you do it. I would say don't hesitate to jump in and, invite the guest back and say, I'd really like to, work with you tomorrow. If that's something you're interested in, here's what that looks like. It could be, it could feel really like to some real sales pitchy at first. And then as you've connected, but as you gain those connections with the guests more and more, you can, tie in some personal pieces that you've learned about them. I think one of the other pieces that we promoted in the original model, which funny, we called it the connection model, is like, how do you connect with the guest? That really prescriptive one I talked about with that 2012, 2016 team was ask the question behind the question. You're not just asking them what you know, you can ask them like what sports they play,
Mhm.
right? So you can transfer their you know, learning to the sport physically.
Mhm.
You know, maybe it's bowling, and you're like, they're like, bowling's my thing. Like, I'm in a league, it's fun, it's social. Well, you just got a lot of cues, and maybe you're not going to be able to transfer the movement patterns of bowling. I'm sure many of you could in your creative ways to the physical attributes, but what is that about motivates them about bowling? And
Mm.
now you know that, like, oh, they like the social aspect, they like the camaraderie, they like some competition. Now you have some data to
Mhm.
work with to start creating their experience, you
Mhm.
know, and it's beyond like teaching for transfer physically, but it's actually motivation. And that ties into the people
Awesome.
skills and how you can connect with them, you
Mhm.
know, and maybe in that wrap up, you're tying back something, you know, you're revealing kind of like, you know, and we set up that little game amongst the, you know, participants, and that was really fun because I know you like bowling and you seem pretty competitive, and you're like tying these things in, and then they're like, wow, they really get me. They really get me. I want to be with that person again. And it's not a trick. You're like being pretty genuine, you know? And
Yeah.
so it may start out to be like this, you know, really like insert this here, and then you'll
Mhm.
figure out how to weave it in, and you'll just get better and better. And so like at a base
Mhm.
level, I think that's a good way to practice, and you can train yourself to do
Mhm.
that. And, you know, another thing I wanted to point out is just kind of like, I wanted to point, I really wanted to tie just a couple things with teaching skills and technical skills and how it supports the people skills.
Mhm.
And I don't, this is something I thought about kind of a couple weeks ago around, you know, within teaching, an important
Mhm.
part is reflective learning, you know,
Mm.
reflecting on the learning experience. And that
Mhm.
really can segue nicely into the people skills as you're reflecting on the interactions you've had with people and the whole experience, not just did they get turning, did they turn left and right? You know, you can really reflect back. How did they react when I presented it this way? You know,
Mm.
what were the moments that that student really had accelerated learning, you know, and that
Mhm.
reflective piece really ties into that awareness, you know, awareness of the social environment and awareness of yourself and how you presented the information. So there's a
Mhm.
cool tie in there, and that I think at someday will be articulated even better, but I know there's a tie in there with the teaching skills and what we do.
Mhm.
And as well as in the technical skills part, you know, a lot of the technical understanding has shifted from like rote memory to like application and how the
Mhm.
information is applied. And it has a lot of reflective um, ability on your own skills. And so a
Mhm.
lot of that technical understanding really relates to reflecting back on, are you able to, you know, do this demonstration or do this, you know, activity well, and what may you need to change to like be more successful. And that really ties into that self-awareness kind of in a more
Mhm.
physical way. But you know, all these things start to intersect, and yet don't be overwhelmed that it's all new. We're just kind of repackaged some things, supported some great materials that we've already had scattered amongst the manuals, and just kind of collected it a little bit more. And I would just encourage people to focus on what is their strength and what is their
Mhm.
weakness. Is your strength technical skills? Well, just know that you probably are going to want to sign up for technical skills training more because that's your strength and that's what you gravitate to. Try to fight that. Try to go
Mhm.
against that and say, maybe I should sign up for this clinic, you know, at your home resort or through the
Mhm.
division, because I'm a little uncomfortable in this topic and don't really know. So, like, I would say, be brave, get be comfortable with being uncomfortable, challenge yourself. You know, what we're seeing is the participants in these people skills clinics are
Mhm.
the ones already bought in. They're already like, they love people. They're typically
Mhm.
extroverts, and they like, these clinics turn out to be really fun because everyone loves it. What we're not seeing is the people that we feel we need to reach the most. And that's the people that tend to veer towards their technical prowess of, you know,
Mhm.
technical skills, because they're going out to work on their own skiing. They're going out to work on, you know, nerding out on like, micro details of like, what happens when I put the phone in my left pocket, and, it's, I'm just saying, like, I see it as a training manager and I see it in the division. Get out there, get familiar. And even if you have to look at the people skills in a technical way to kind of digest it, it will create satisfaction in that learning for you. And so, yeah, I just want to encourage people to try to balance out. If one skill set is heavier than the other, try to balance it out to be a more well-rounded instructor. And you will see results. Back to, it's relevant to the job. You will see better results with your students. You'll see, more praise from your supervisors that you're bringing guests back more, and just like really, doing a great job overall. And you will see, peers gravitating towards you to learn from you, as a mentor. Like it'll be a noticeable difference. I feel
that's awesome.
Yeah,
this is great advice, Eric. Like, it sounds like this idea of identify what your weakness is and focus on that. And I even heard you say kind of like check the thing that you want to continue your learning on, and maybe that's actually the thing you don't need as much. And I love the bonus you just mentioned of like, people are going to gravitate towards you. That's awesome. I think that in general, that's a life skill that we typically doesn't ever get addressed directly in terms of how to human differently or better, or do something that's outside of our comfort zone.
Yeah, which I think there's such transferable skills in other jobs. There's so many transferable skills that we're presenting that, and I just want to be clear, I have mastered none of them, and I'm just continue to work on it. Like, it's one thing to know them inside and out, help create some of them, but to like master them, it doesn't make me a master at it. So we all have room to grow, really. And it's gravitating towards, and it ties back to that one example of like, Alpine really gravitating towards technical skills, snowboard towards people skills. And it's like, we had to break out of that. We had to break out of that to like really excel in all areas and push forward on things that, we didn't think were as important. And, that's where we've all seen some breakthroughs in our own development, and, and created some vulnerabilities along the way, which are uncomfortable and yet makes us stronger in the end, makes us like, more adaptable in the end.
I love that. I love that. This is incredible, Eric. Thank you so much.
Oh, yeah.
If people want to reach out to you, is there a best way for them to reach out with any follow-up questions? Is there a way you can be reached?
Yeah, I mean, just my regular email, ericrolls@gmail.com.
Awesome.
Is just fine. On social, or, you could probably track me down pretty easily. So I'm happy to entertain questions and chat, and
good.
And then maybe we can do it again sometime.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I think part twos are inevitable, given just how much I think that the community is going to be talking about people skills, implementation. And I know just from the summer interviews is that, this summer is, kind of first rollout. And so I think our community is really going to pique their interest and start to see it in real time at their resorts and mixed into their training programs. So I can only imagine that a whole new layer of curiosity is going to start surfacing for us.
Yeah, and I do want to thank you for letting me tell the history before it's lost, and I think that's important to support the why, and also that it didn't find its success until more people were involved. Until it didn't really take off and find its success until there were more minds, looking at this and creating this, across disciplines. It may have been a big push for the snowboarders, but then it really propelled forward once, we took a deeper dive into it, with a lot of just talented folks that we needed to get where we are now. And it will evolve a little bit too from here, right? We don't even know what the future will hold. It'll keep evolving, and it'll be great. So.
I love that. That's perfect. Well, I have two quick questions for you.
Oh, yeah.
To give our listeners or viewers a chance to get to know you just a little bit better. Can you tell me quickly just about a moment, in a regular moment, that brings you joy?
A regular moment that brings me joy. I'm just going to go with the first thing that pops in my head. And
Good.
Since we are talking about sliding on snow, it is those sensations that are created from, just a smooth carve on a corduroy snow that, is, slicing effortlessly through that snow without any extra like sensory input besides maybe some coldness on the face. That brings me so much joy. And equally, that floating feeling in powder, of course, where you feel like your whole body is flowing down the mountain. You're not resisting the mountain. There's not specific pressures that are pushed on any particular part of your body. You're just floating through powder. I mean, to me, that like brings me to a happy place, like through like physical sensations to how I am mentally. Like
and thank you for taking me there in your description. I love that. One other quick question for you is, tell us a snack that you love.
Almonds, like salted dried almonds, super packable. Throw them in your pocket, a mix of goodness, can push you through a time when you're hungry, and they last well. Almonds is my go-to right there. And maybe like a half and half mix of cashews and almonds to get the texture thing.
Nice.
But yeah, go-to almonds all the way.
I love it. Well, thank you, Eric. Thanks for your time today. If a round 2 shows up for us, let's make it happen. Cool. And thanks to all the listeners here. This is another virtual Apres brought to you by PSIA Northwest, signing out.